This happened on Halloween of 2019. My friends and I were feeling the spooky vibes of the month, and we wanted to do something fun and exciting to satisfy our thirst. Being the dumb college students that we were, we decided to explore an allegedly haunted cemetery in the hopes of maybe seeing some genuine paranormal activity. Being that we're from Illinois, the popular destination of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery immediately came to our mind, and it was settled upon. Once the sun had set and night had fallen, we'd make our move, sneaking into the cemetery after it had closed to get the full experience without having to worry about any other visitors. I must admit that I always wanted to do something like this before, but I was genuinely afraid of what might be waiting for us in that cemetery so late at night. Stories always circulated around the various apparitions that people had encountered before and the different sounds that chilled them to the bone. Anyway, all of this was festering inside of me well before we actually started driving to the cemetery that evening. It was a pleasantly long drive, but I wasn't really in the mood to think about anything else except for the potential horrors that roamed the cemetery for all of eternity, or so they say. Couple in the fact that we were going to be trespassing in order to get through in the first place, and I was a nervous wreck. My friends were apparently doing a much better job of keeping their fears in check. And for the sake of the story, I'll call them Logan, Paul, and Eddie. For the entire car ride there, they were laughing and joking around, and they weren't worried about what we would be getting into or what we might see. Looking back at the whole situation, I should have known that their optimism was a bad sign. No way would we have been able to explore this place without being the slightest bit nervous, but what's done is done. A little past 7, once night had fallen and darkness went on in every direction as far as the eye could see, we arrived. Since the cemetery was located in the center of a dense forest on all sides, essentially forming a square where all the roads would go around it, we were to park at some restaurant that was open late and had a huge parking lot. This was in the exact opposite direction from the front entrance of the cemetery, so we figured that this was our best chance of getting in while avoiding any cops in our way. From there, we just crossed the street on foot, and we had a bit of a walk before arriving at a somewhat hidden path leading into the forest. Taking this back path would take a bit more time to get to the actual cemetery itself, since those trees were particularly thick and dense, but it was well worth it. After everything was said and done, we found ourselves beginning our trek onto the path. We were unsure of how far we'd actually have to go before we'd find what we were looking for. It was a windy night, and even though it wasn't especially cold or anything, I still remember my teeth chattering and my skin getting cold. Aside from the occasional sound of leaves being crunched under our shoes as we walked, there was absolute silence. My once cheerful and energetic friends were now, all of a sudden, quiet and subdued. Logan, in particular, had this odd expression on his face, it being illuminated by my phone's flashlight as we walked. It was a cross between fear and pain, like every step that he took was causing him physical harm. Before I could question him about it, we found ourselves at our destination. Here we were in the heart of Bachelor's Grove, with graves all around us and a certain chill in the air. We all split up to cover more ground, promising to call the others over if they were to encounter anything. I didn't want us going too far away from each other, but I also didn't want to seem like a wimp, so I kept my mouth shut and began exploring. Most of the graves I looked at had withered away from time and the elements, so I couldn't really make out anything that was on the tombstones. The few dates that I could read went back to the late 1800s, and a sinking feeling in my stomach started once I realized these people had been dead and decaying in the ground for over 100 years. By now, I was feeling extremely uncomfortable, and I began to back away from the graves, and I started to look for my friends to see if they had found anything supernatural, when all of a sudden, I heard it. It wasn't just me either. All of us heard it. It was low, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention, but with the way our senses were heightened, there was no way we would miss it. It appeared to be some sort of chanting, and it sounded like it was coming a little bit north from our direction, further into the clearing. I couldn't make out any of the words being spoken, or if it was even in English, but there was something creepy about the tone, like it was religious, and the chanting was some sort of prayer. The voice that was doing the chanting was deep and gravelly, belonging to some man that we couldn't see. The four of us shined our lights on each other to see our expressions, and at that moment, we knew what we were going to do. Despite every fiber in my being telling me not to go any further and see what the source of this chanting was, my curiosity got the better of me, and I just couldn't resist. Eddie whispered to turn off our lights completely, while he dimmed his just enough to where it wouldn't attract too much attention, but we would still be able to see. The next few moments we start to creep towards the noise, the more and more I start to lose it. My breathing was uncontrollable, and it was like my heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was so afraid of what we would find, and yet I still had to know. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we had entered the clearing and were a few steps away from the chanting. Eddie shined his light in the direction ahead of us, and for just a brief moment, we saw a cloaked figure bent over something in the grass, and it was still chanting in that unrecognizable language. The thing in the grass looked like some sort of circle with a mark in the center, and I swear I wish I could tell you I'm lying about this, but when I realized what the symbol was, I felt like throwing up. There was no mistake. It was a pentagram made of some strange material. For the moment that Eddie had illuminated the sight in front of us, I had been able to get a glimpse of the pentagram's material being bright red, and I shouldn't have to say anything else about that. Once the light from Eddie's phone hit the back of the man's head, he immediately stopped chanting, and he stood up, still facing the direction of the pentagram. I can only describe the next few minutes as unadulterated terror. But before we knew it, he screamed a blood-curdling scream that rattled us to the core, and then he turned around and he started to run towards us. Everything happened so fast I couldn't even make out the man's facial expressions, except for deep, sunken eyes and an expression that radiated pure hatred. He really did want to bring us harm, and not wasting any time, we all fled the direction that we came from, and we ran faster than I think any of us had ever run in our entire lives. I couldn't even scream while I ran away. I was too petrified to make any noise. Maybe it was a miracle, but we somehow managed to retrace our steps all the way through the path that we took to enter the cemetery in the forest, and eventually we came out on the main road. Afraid of what I would see if I looked back, I made a beeline to the car along with the others and hopped into the back seat. We didn't waste any time locking the door and rolling up the window. We drove out of there in no time flat, and we didn't stop driving 20 miles over the speed limit until we were at least 10 minutes away. I honestly have no idea how far or for how long that man chased us, but I do know this for sure. We weren't supposed to be there that night, and we must have been interrupting something important. I'll never know what it was, and honestly, I don't hope to ever find out. We never talked about this experience after that night, and we never went on another trip to an abandoned or haunted place ever again. I think that fright that we felt is enough to satisfy us for the rest of our lives, and I'm thankful beyond words that we all managed to get out alive. McKamey Manor is arguably the most terrifying and controversial haunted attraction in the United States today. Yet, what makes the manor so different from the others is that there are no zombies, ghosts, or werewolves to frighten visitors. Instead, members of the staff are permitted to bind, gag, and push visitors to their physical and emotional limits. Obviously, it's not something the average horror fan is going to enjoy, and there are several entry requirements. Visitors must be at least 21, they must pass a physical exam, a drug test, and a background check. McKamey Manor operates all year, and it actually offers visitors a hefty $20,000 if they're able to survive for more than 10 hours. According to the Manor's founder, Russ McKamey, not a single visitor has ever managed to endure the full experience. The reason why the Manor is so controversial, he says, is because nobody is saying what's actually happening in here, and that's out of respect for the Manor and myself and what we're trying to produce here. If the people who go through the haunt want to spill all the beans and say everything that happens, they certainly could, but they don't, and that makes the haters crazy because they don't know what's happening. That's why you hear all the insane rumors, because they're just making things up in their mind of what is happening. Now, since there isn't an entrance fee, the manor is extremely selective, and just a handful of patrons are permitted to enter each weekend. McKamey also requires that his participants refrain from physically engaging with the actors or from using curse words. Breaking these rules are grounds for an immediate cessation of the tour. Based in Tennessee and Alabama, the Manor advertises itself as an audience participation event in which you will live your own horror movie, but critics have described it as a torture chamber. Even other members of the Hollywood haunt industry have leveled some serious criticism at this place, branding the owner a psychopath who has managed to find a legal loophole to satisfy an evil, sadistic streak. Upon being granted permission to enter, visitors are required to sign a 40-page waiver prior to the tour. The waiver asks that the visitor understands and agrees to the fact that not only were they warned multiple times not to participate in McKamey Manor, but that it's only a game and they aren't really being tortured, although they will be roughed up and they may well suffer from some degree of physical injury during their visit. One particularly ominous line from the waiver states that McKamey Manor is not for the weak, but that visitors will never be held against their will, but visitors may have their heads shaved or even their fingers broken, since mouth traps are used to inflict discomfort or pain. There are also clauses that state that dangerous heights or even poisonous animals may be used to terrify participants. But perhaps maybe the most terrifying thing of all, the waiver states that participants may be buried alive, specifically under 12 feet of dirt, although they are promised access to a limited amount of air. Amy Milligan, a Californian who visited McKamey Manor, insisted that her experience was more than just a game. She asserted that she suffered injuries that were way beyond cuts and bruises, and that she was even waterboarded by members of the staff while they laughed in her face. She said that she left a positive review of her experience so that McKamey would upload the footage of her time there to their YouTube channel, which she intended to use as evidence of excessive abuse. But when it was uploaded, she found the worst parts had been edited out. She said, "I told them, I can't do this, please let me out." But she said they told her that they weren't done yet. They then shoved her head back into a bucket of water and that she thought she was going to die in there. Another person from California, Laura Hertz Brotherton, had a similar story. She too was left with more than just superficial injuries. She says that before she was allowed to participate, she was asked to prove her loyalty to the manor by completing a series of tasks, some of which included purchasing an adult onesie and filming a personal visit to a Halloween store before uploading the evidence to Facebook. According to Brotherton, she believed that McKamey was particularly hard on her once she admitted to having been involved in an extramarital affair. She said that for some reason, Russ McKamey was personally offended by this. She was waterboarded, tased, and whipped. She said she still has scars of everything that they did to her. She was repeatedly hit in the face, open-handed, as hard as a man could hit a woman. She also added that she was blindfolded and then she was held by her ankles and submerged underwater for so long that her body started to involuntarily thrash. She was later forced to dig a hole in the dirt with her bare hands. Then she was made to lie in the fresh hole while they covered her with dirt, giving her only a straw to breathe through. It was then that she repeated her safe words several times, only being freed from her live burial after having screamed at the top of her lungs. When it was all over, she said she went to the hospital but refused to reveal to the hospital staff exactly who or what had caused her injuries. And as is standard practice in such incidents, the hospital staff called the police, but Brotherton left prior to their arrival. She later worked up the courage to report the incident to law enforcement, but she was told that she didn't have a case because she had signed the waiver. She also took photographs of her injuries. In one photograph, she's wearing a neck brace and a hospital gown with her face showing obvious signs of swelling. She also has scratches on her cheeks and small cuts at the corner of her mouth from fish hooking, which is where a person takes their fingers and they put them inside of your mouth before stretching your mouth open. Another photograph shows a large open wound on one of her knees, apparently from where McKamey's staff forced her to crawl on rough ground. According to an article that was written about her experiences, Russ McKamey confirmed her story, although he did shed doubt on the severity of her injuries. Yet the article also goes on to state that some of McKamey's claims are pure fantasy. There aren't any alligators, there's no quicksand, and most of all, there's no 20 grand prize for those that last longer than 10 hours. McKamey himself then posted on Facebook regarding the article, saying that it was based on pure speculation and exaggerated stories. He had apparently reached out to the publication in question to offer them access to other visitors who would contradict Brotherton's assertions, but was ignored. He also claimed that he had been in touch with other extreme attractions and discovered that Brotherton had been banned by them for other salacious claims. According to McKamey, the article was an opinion piece that masqueraded as a piece of investigative journalism. It was then that he laid out a challenge to the journalist who wrote the piece, stating that there was one simple way to determine what was fact or fiction. He said, "Take the tour. What do you have to lose? Do you have what it takes?" And then he said, "But we know you'll never do that. Instead, you'll just sit behind your desk in the comfort of your safe space writing about second-hand information instead of actually seeking the truth from your own experience." According to Facebook users who are members of the McKamey Manor private Facebook group, McKamey still shares videos, and he will even occasionally live stream some of the tours. These videos have professional editing, lighting, and props, and it raises the question as to whether or not some of the tours are actually staged. One video shows a group of visitors reading the infamous waiver aloud before the camera documents them signing it. The people that are attempting to read the waiver out loud then have their hair pulled, they get smacked in the face, and then they are choked with rope. Maybe the most interesting question is, how is McKamey able to fund the manor? And he doesn't profit off of the manor, but was somehow able to invest $500,000 of his own money into the establishment of the manor in San Diego. According to McKamey himself, he spends almost $300 a night for an on-site EMT and around $20,000 a year on insurance. He also estimates that it costs around $500 per visitor. So just how is this manor funded? According to rumor, McKamey sells footage of the tours on the deep web, as well as taking a cut from a betting syndicate who watch the live streams from a top-secret location somewhere in the United States. That sounds like Hostel 3. But these contradict his claims that he doesn't profit off of the manor in any way, shape, or form. He himself has admitted to money troubles after losing his job as a veterans advocate, and his only source of income is his $800 monthly retirement. There has been debate on the legality of operating McKamey Manor. For example, the police have been called to the manor on more than one occasion, and at one point they arrived to find a woman locked in a basement. She was shivering and bruised, and she had duct tape over her mouth. When police asked if the interaction was consensual, she said yes, so the cops didn't have any other option. They had to leave. According to the district attorney of Lawrence County, Tennessee, the manor operates well within the law, given their use of waivers. As long as the participants are there voluntarily, no crime is being committed. However, a participant can withdraw consent at any time, and if staff were to disregard the withdrawal of consent, a participant would then be classified as a victim who is then being held against their will. Russ McKamey also makes it clear that the Manor's Tennessee location is far less physically involved than it was in San Diego, being more of a psychological experience than a physical one. There's no torture, there's nothing like that. But under hypnosis, if you make someone believe that there's something really scary going on, that's just in their own mind, and it's not reality. If you're good enough and you're able to get inside somebody's head the way that I can make folks believe whatever I want them to believe. I'm the most straight-laced guy you could think of, but here I run this crazy haunted house, and people twisting around in their little minds. It really is a magic act, what I do. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors, he said. However, that isn't to say that people escape the manor unharmed. The manor stands by the possibility that one may leave with cuts, bruises, or even broken bones, as stated in the waiver. The manor may well be one of the greatest mysteries in the entire entertainment industry, and by the looks of things, it will remain that way. He said that people have sent me death threats, even shot at my house, but I'm not going to open it to the masses. I like the mystery of the manor. If you saw everything, it would be like any other haunted house. Even when I'm dead and gone, I want to make sure that people are still talking about McKamey Manor. That's why nobody is really going to ever see behind the wall.